I love when we can catch up with my friend Danny Kannell, Cover 3 podcast. You guys do a bang-up job. I don't even mind thanking our friends at Bet Online for hooking us up with Danny Kannell, former Florida State quarterback, a legend, former New York Giant. My gosh, what's going on with both of those football programs? We're not going to talk about them. We're going to talk about the college football playoff. Danny, how are you, man?
I am fantastic, Adam. I don't know about you, but I'm in such a good mood because I think this has been one of the more entertaining Novembers in the history of college football. Just the debates, the discussion, and the meaningful games that we still have left with only 2 games. For all, and I don't know if you were one of them, so you might be offended by this, but for all the losers who told me they didn't want to expand the playoffs, where are they now? They're awful quiet.
Wait a second.
This thing is going to be so much fun.
Well, first of all, it is fun. And I'm not offended.
Oh, wait, you're one of them?
I'm not offended. I'm not offended that you called me a loser. That's okay. You're not the first person that has called me that. In fact, I was called worse than that online when I questioned whether or not Mac Brown should be coming back for another year at North Carolina. That's another topic of discussion. Maybe we'll get into it. I don't know. But here's the thing, because I was going to ask you this. I'm anti-playoff for a lot of reasons that have nothing to do with would it be fun, right? And clearly this has been a fun season because, look, in normal years, Georgia's got 2 losses. Alabama's got two losses, right? They're out. Right. They would not be a part of it. And in this case, they will be a part of it. And that is good because we get, Georgia, Tennessee had a lot of meaning last week when otherwise it really wouldn't have mattered with Georgia having 2 losses already and Tennessee about to take their second L. But I am curious about this because the largest complaint that we had over the course of the 4-team playoff was that it was the same teams over and over and over again, and it was. It was Alabama, it was Clemson, then it became Georgia, it was always Ohio State, and it was always Oklahoma getting bludgeoned by whoever they met in the playoff. But in this particular year, wouldn't it have been unbelievably fascinating to see how the committee dealt with the top 4 when you had so many teams take losses at this point? I mean, could you imagine? Is there a chance that Indiana, before last week, BYU, like some of the teams that hadn't lost yet, could we actually close our eyes and imagine a playoff with the committee going, Oregon is 1, BYU is 2, Indiana, that would have been a great social experiment.
It would have been, but I think it would have cleared up because I do think you would have seen your first 2-loss SEC team in. It just would have been the SEC champ, which would have been boring. I think you would have seen the Big Ten champ in, which again probably would have been boring. You probably would have seen an ACC champion, assuming it's one of those 1-loss teams without SMU or Miami. And then you probably would have had a second Big Ten team in, which would have just been, Armageddon in the SEC if that would have happened. So I don't think it would have been as much fun. I'll still push back. I think this year's more fun. I think it would have cleared itself out, and we wouldn't have been talking about those games.
Well, it's going to clear itself out as well with the 12-team field. I am positive of this. Until last year, and we all know, we can all agree, they screwed it up last year to make Alabama and Greg Sankey happy. I don't think it was as much about Florida State. I think they were collateral damage. It was more about how can we have a playoff without a team from the SEC? That is sacrilege. So I think it was more about that. So this last year was the first year they screwed it up. I think they're going to get more wrong this year than they did in any of the other years combined, which again I guess is 1. I think they're going to get more teams wrong because they are ignoring, I think, the most important factor about how you compile your record, and it's who you've played against. Indiana's played 1 team with a winning record heading into the game against Ohio State. 1. That's Washington. Everybody else is either 500 or below on Indiana's schedule. How can they, with a straight face, not pay attention to that?
Oh boy, I like the way this is going because I think I'm on the opposite side of this one with you. I'll throw it back at you and say that Texas, why are they just sitting there at number 3 and no one has brought up the very same numbers with the Texas Longhorns, and including the fact that they lost at home to Georgia, and it didn't look pretty. Like, we keep talking about, Indiana better look good against Ohio State, or else they could be left out. So Texas looked awful against Georgia. I mean, they looked like the worst team. Georgia pretty much came in and mantled them in their own backyard. Indiana has to go on the road. And to mention those games over winning teams, when I saw the graphic the other night with Texas, their two wins, like key wins, were against Vanderbilt, who is, I think, 6-4, and Colorado State, a team from the Mountain West, who's 7-3. Like, what resonates about those wins? There's nothing. So I think if we want to have that debate, let's have it. But why are we having it about them? Why aren't we having it about Penn State? Another one where they have that, quote, good loss at home. They don't really have a lot of great wins. It's Illinois is probably their best win.
Yep.
So I just want to see everyone held to the same standard. And I feel like Indiana's getting picked on because they're the new kids on the block and they don't have that traditional success that a lot of these other blue bloods have.
So you and I are actually on the same side of that argument. I just use Indiana because they were undefeated and they came up fifth in the most recent college football playoff ranking, which of course
should have been third.
Well, yeah, if we're just because it's clear that they're just using wins and losses. Because I still don't get. BYU, yeah, they lose to Kansas, right? At this point, we're already starting to turn the page. Kansas is much better. They're 4-6. Like, I'm not saying they're terrible. Like, I think Georgia Tech is good. I don't think that's a terrible loss that Miami took, right? I understand. I've watched Georgia Tech play enough. I think it's a good football team. They're not a great football team, but there aren't a ton of those outside of the top, couple. And let me ask Danny Kannell, thanks to our friends at Bet Online, who do you think the best team is? Forget about records. Who's the best team?
So I'll give you two answers because one is my preseason pick to win the national title, and I'm stubborn and I'm not going to switch it because I feel like I'm right.
Florida State? Really?
No.
Sorry. I
was wrong. I thought they'd contend for the ACC, so I was very wrong on Florida State. Freely admit that. But Oregon, I thought, was the best team coming into the country, and in large part, it was because of Dylan Gabriel. I thought he was a perfect fit for that system. I thought he'd play very similarly to Bo Nix, and I thought their defense would get better, which they did, and they've been better. So I'm not going to get off of that one. I will say this. Georgia, if they get that version of Carson Beck, which has been incredibly up and down, he's had 3 games where he has 3 interceptions, but they started to protect him better, and we saw what he's capable of doing in that performance against Tennessee. We know their defense is always just going to be good. I think Georgia's a team that I think would be a really tough out. Like, if you wanted me to put money on somebody else besides my preseason pick, I'd probably go with the Georgia Bulldogs. Depth. They've got figured out different ways to win. They can win with their defense. They can win with their offense. I think Georgia's that team that I would probably say, let me put a little side action on them, knowing that I already got some on Oregon.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. It's funny. A couple of weeks ago, Chip Patterson, who joins us every Wednesday, you know him very well from the Cover 3 podcast, Danny Kannell. He basically ran down a litany of reasons why he thought Georgia was disappointing, and I get it. They have not looked like Georgia, which, of course, in a 12-team playoff era now, they have the luxury of kind of growing into the season as long as they haven't taken on too many losses. But if they play the way they did against Tennessee the rest of the way, I don't know how the tiebreakers are going to work out in the SEC. There's going to be like 8 teams with 2 losses. So I think they're just going to draw lots and straws at the end, and whoever comes up is going to win. Actually, I guess it's going to be the winner of Texas A&M is ultimate, unless A&M loses to Auburn and then beats Texas. Everybody will have 2 losses. But it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. But I agree. I think if Georgia gets back to being what they have been, I do think that they're the best team in the country. What has happened to Ohio State this year?
Nothing. They've been fine. Like, they're right where they need to be. In the mix. They're still right there. Now, what is getting interesting is the injuries on the offensive line are starting to pile up. Like, they lost 2 starting left tackles, and one of them the week of the game against Penn State, and it didn't bother them. They still were able to win. Then they, this week against Indiana, they're going to have to replace their starting center, Seth McLaughlin, who's been one of the better centers in the country.
Yeah.
But they've just been kind of, we talk about schedules and big wins. Like, And outside of Penn State, like they've had 8 home games they've been able to play.
Sure.
Like that's genius scheduling. Their non-conference is kind of a joke. So really all they have as far as resume is a road win against Penn State, which is good. And then they have that proverbial good loss, a term that I despise. But it was a close game against Oregon.
Mm-hmm.
So they're positioned exactly where they need to be. I worry about the issues on the offensive line, maybe not so much against Indiana, but against maybe in the Big Ten championship rematch with Oregon or in the playoffs. That's when I think the depth along the offensive line could become an issue as they're starting to get injuries start to mount up.
If Ohio State beats Indiana, regardless of what it looks like, unless they blow Indiana's doors off, beats Michigan, loses to Oregon again, they're still a playoff team, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And that's, again, regardless of what it looks like, it's still, top 5 win against Indiana. That will be, credited for the committee. But you bring up something interesting that is really the great unknown. What happens if they get blown out against Oregon in the Big Ten championship game?
Mm-hmm.
Or what happens if the SEC championship game turns into a rout? Do teams get penalized for achieving something that should be rewarded? Like you're getting to the conference championship game, but if you lose it, you get sent home, while meanwhile the team that finished 3rd in the Big Ten or 3rd in the SEC could advance. That is the biggest flaw of this new system that I'm worried about, and I don't know what the committee's going to do, but I don't see how you find, justice in that. I think that is wrong. Same way I think it's wrong that Notre Dame gets basically a free pass to the playoff and a bye on conference championship weekend. I think there's a flaw in that setup as well.
Yeah, well, if you look at Notre Dame's resume versus SMU's resume, SMU's is better. SMU is outside of the field. Notre Dame is solidly in it and hosting a first-round game. Danny Kannell is joining us here for our friends at Bet Online, also Cover 3 podcast. So let me I guess we're not even going to talk about games. Let me we're just talking about concepts of this playoff. So what is the benefit for Clemson? And this, I'm going to get to the integrity part of this. What is the benefit for Clemson to play Georgia in the season opening game as opposed to scheduling, since I brought them up already, Kansas? Kansas is preseason ranked, but because Clemson played Georgia, who I think you and I both agree is one of the best 2 or 3 teams in the country, they lose, and the second half didn't look good. They lose that game. If they go 10-2, they're not in. They're probably not going to be in the playoff. And unless they just rout South Carolina, which I guess they could, I don't think they will. As opposed to being 11-1, and even if you lose that game and you don't play in the ACC championship game, 11-1 is going to get you in if you're Clemson. So what's the benefit of playing Georgia?
There is none.
Right.
And that's one of the things I think that's a problem. And it's happened before in the playoff. I don't know if you remember, Oregon went and played Auburn. I think it was 2 years ago. I think it was Bo Nix's first game against an SEC opponent. Oh, they played Georgia, excuse me. It was before that. I think it was actually before Bo Nix got there. But they were a 2-loss Pac-12 champion, and they had lost to Auburn first game of the year. And it kept them out of the playoff. Go look, you mentioned Kansas. I say, why even mess with Kansas? It's non-conference schedule this year. I mean, it was 3 absolute cupcakes, all group of 5 and maybe an FCS in there as well. Go look at Indiana. That's the biggest gripe I have with them, is that they're non-conference. It's, I forget the teams, but they're all group of 5 and maybe an FCS in there as well. If you're why not play another cupcake if you're Clemson? Why even risk it? Because it's going to penalize them. It is absolutely. So here's the way I think you have to fix it, because it's all by choice. Clemson chose, and I appreciate that. And I think they should be rewarded for that game, for taking on that risk, which they're actually going to get hurt from it. Because, and I'm sure Dabo Swinney would say, well, we would have had to play better. If we kept it close, it wouldn't hurt us as much. But if you didn't play it, it wouldn't hurt you at all. This is why I think we need to have, and it's kind of that discussion that we have all the time, we need to have some sort of governing body that has scheduling that's equal across the board. Why do we have the ACC and SEC play 8 conference games? Meanwhile, the Big 12 and Big 10 play 9.
Right.
And a lot of these Big 10 teams play 9 conference games, and they play a pretty tough non-conference opponent. There's no fairness in that. So I think until we get somebody that mandates, look, all the Power 4 teams are going to play 10 Power Four conference, and you can make it, if you want it to be 8 conference games and 2 non-conference, that's fine. But at minimum, you're going to play, 10 Power Four, games. And then you can play, if you want to do 2 cupcakes, go ahead. If you want to add one more Power Four to, boost your strength of schedule, by all means, go ahead. But you've got to have somebody that holds these teams accountable that do schedule a bunch of cupcakes and only play 8 conference, games. So, and a lot of times play 4 group of 5 teams or maybe an FCS team that's in there as well. So I think that's the biggest flaw in the system right now. I mean, there's many flaws. That's one of the many flaws, that we need some sort of scheduling continuity across the Power Four level where everyone, because we're comparing them, right?
Right.
But we're really comparing apples to oranges. And that's one of the things we keep pounding the table is strength of schedule. Well, how do we do that when the schedules don't even remotely resemble one another?
Right, and the committee then openly admits that it's more eye test than it is strength of schedule. I didn't like that from Ward Manuel because the eye test certainly looks better when you're playing against lesser competition. Danny Kannell, the highest level of competition that I can think of. I appreciate your time, man. Always check out the Cover 3 podcast. Chip knows I'm a stan for it, and I'm a stan for you. I'll talk to you very soon.
Oh, you know what else, Adam? Last thing, I'm glad Mac Brown's coming back. I'm a fan of Mac Brown. So if you said don't come back, I'm mad at you.
I am. No, then you're mad at me, but it's okay. I'm also a fan of Mac Brown. I just think that the time is up.
I think he'll do the right thing. I think he was close to it when they dropped, gave up 70. Which I forget what opponent was it, App State?
No,
I think he was
James
really
Madison.
Close. James Madison. I think he was close, and I think during that 4-game losing streak, he and Sally had a conversation about it. I bet. But now that he's kind of got the team and he's seen them still fighting, I think he still wants to give it his best. And I think if he's still got it in him, I mean, look at the success he's brought to North Carolina. Like, they've been consistent. Now, I know they haven't been a 10-win or 11-win team, but they've been consistently competitive, which is something you can't say about the previous 20 years with that much consistency.
That is true. He has brought them back to a certain level. My fear is that he can't take them beyond the level that they are at. You can do it. You should apply for the job if Mac ever steps down.
All right, I will. I love Chapel Hill.
Danny, thanks, man.
See you, Adam.
I love talking to Danny Kannell. Bomani Jones, more on the decision. I guess we haven't heard anything definitive